Hello, my name is Cornell Clayton. I'm the director of the Thomas S. Foley Institute here at Washington State University. And on behalf of the Foley Institute and on behalf of Global Studies here at Washington State, I'd like to welcome you out to tonight's lecture. Before we get started, I want to tell you a little bit about the Foley Institute, and then I'll introduce our guest speaker this evening. The Foley Institute, many of you might know, was established in 1995 to honor the service of Thomas S. Foley, who was a representative from the 5th Congressional District in Washington for 30 years and went on to become Speaker of the House of Representatives. And the Institute honors his service to Washington and to the country through there was a grant from the U.S. Congress. The Institute's mission is threefold. It is to support public policy research on campus. It is to engage students in public service and public policy. And finally, it is to bring to campus speakers on public affairs and public issues and to enliven the debate and the intellectual climate here on campus. And so it is a great honor for us tonight to have an internationally renowned writer and acclaimed social critic, Christopher Hitchens. Over the years, Mr. Hitchens has been a columnist for numerous publications, including Vanity Fair, The Nation, and Slate magazines. He is a frequent contributor to the New York Review of Books, the London Review of Books, the New York Times Book Review, and the Los Angeles Times Book Review, and the Atlantic Monthly, among many other major publications. As a foreign correspondent, Mr. Hitchens has written for more than 60 different countries, from Afghanistan, Albania, and Angola, through Ireland, India, and Iran, to Vietnam, the Western Sahara, and Zimbabwe. He is the only writer since 2000 to have written from all three countries comprising what former President Bush called the axis of evil: Iran, Iraq, and North Korea. Mr. Hitchens is also the author of numerous books. His most recent book is entitled God is Not Great. His other books include Class and Nostalgia, Karl Marx and the Paris Commune, The Monarchy, a critique of Britain's favorite fetish, International Territory, the United Nations after 50 years, The Palestinian Question, The Trial of Henry Kissinger, and A Long Short War, the Postponed Liberation of Iraq. Mr. Hitchens was born in Portsmouth, England, and educated at Balliol College, Oxford, from which he holds an honors degree in politics, philosophy, and economics. He moved to the United States in 1981, where he has since resided and worked as a writer, commentator, critic, and social intellectual for many publications and news programs. Will you please join me now in welcoming Christopher Hitchens to Washington State?
Very nicely, thanks. Well, thank you for that very handsome introduction, and thank you, ladies and gentlemen, very much for coming, and the Foley Center for having the idea of inviting me. I was due to be here a few months ago, and as some of you may know, I had to cancel on the grounds that I had to go to Cuba in the hope of getting the last interview with Fidel Castro, and with the definite possibility of getting the first interview with Raul Castro, and the conceivable chance of flying around Venezuela with Hugo Chavez, thus adding to my axis of evil score. It's no good resting on your laurels with a thing like that. You have to keep up. It's steady work, as the rabbi said. And I'll tell you all about all that another time, but I now feel rather happy that we did postpone this subject for this evening, because it's become the question of the role of religion in public life, especially in a constitutional secular democracy like our own, rather more pertinent than less in that interval. I look out and I see all these eager, keen, idealistic almost, young faces, and it makes me feel sadder and sadder that I become more and more of a curmudgeon with each passing year. One way to watch out for curmudgeonhood in yourselves, brothers and sisters, comrades, friends, ladies and gentlemen, is you start not shouting back at the TV. I don't watch the TV. I can't bear it. But you start talking to the newspapers. Every day I test myself in the morning. I get the New York Times, and I live in Washington, so I get the Washington Post, my hometown rag. Every morning I look at the New York Times to check that they still have on the front page that idiotic little box that says all the news that's fit to print. And I think, does that still piss me off? Yes, it still does. Because I would wonder if I was losing traction if it stopped doing that. I think what moronic committee decided to put that on the front page of a newspaper and keep it there every day, as if they were the ones to tell me what's fit to print and for me to see? It drives me into a paroxysm of rage every morning. So I just check that my heart is therefore in equilibrium. And then I turn to the Washington Post and I just make sure that they're still running horoscopes in the style section. And they always are. And so I send off my email saying this is a disgrace in a serious paper, a journal of record, and so forth. But now I've started reading the kids section of the Washington Post, not just the style bit, because I have a daughter, that's to say, who goes to Sidwell Friends School with the Obama and Biden children. And I don't want her picking up any nonsense from the hometown sheet. And for the inaugural, the other day, they gave a list of all the presidential inaugurals that had ever been, and what all the presidents had and didn't have in common, and it said, I checked, I'm more or less right, all but one of them were of English descent until this one. Martin Van Buren, I think, was the exception. And then it said religion, all Christian. So I thought, now, before my day can start, I've got to now write a letter of complaint to the kids section, for heaven's sake. You can't be lying to the children in this way. The two greatest presidents of the United States, well, I would nominate them as the two greatest after General Washington, Thomas Jefferson and Abraham Lincoln, were definitely not Christian. There's no question about it. Thomas Jefferson took, in his retirement, a New Testament in one hand and a razor blade in the other, and cut out of the New Testament every single verse that was either fantastic, contradictory, wicked, superstitious, unbelievable, or immoral, leaving him with a very slim book that you can now get from the Unitarian Church, and which used to be given in happier days as a present to every newly elected congressman every time they were sworn in. It may still be true, that custom, but it's not made as much of as it could be. And Abraham Lincoln famously refused to join any church, famously would invoke the deity, but would never claim to know what side the deity was on. Was, in other words, like Mr. Jefferson, probably, at the maximum, a deist, someone who believes that there may have been an originating or creating force, but there's no one who answers prayers, or who takes sides in human affairs, or who minds what you feel, or what you dream, or convicts you of thought crime, or cares who you sleep with, or in what way, or what you eat, or on what day you eat it, to extend the same metaphor only slightly. And thus it's a flat-out falsehood to say to the children of Washington, D.C., that we come from a Christian country which has always had Christian presidents, unless we're going to stop teaching them about Mr. Jefferson and Mr. Lincoln. And I think, and this is why I say that I'm gladder to be here in February than I would have been last fall, that I think we may just have inaugurated a third specimen of this non-believing category. And I'll just take a minute to tell you why, because I think it might be of interest and it might be relevant. I generally don't use my press credentials in Washington, D.C. I don't like to be counted in as part of the extras in the theatrical presentation, but I made an exception for this rather amazing democratic event, this mass turnout of the citizenry, in spite of all discouragements from the forces of law and order, just to come and celebrate the fact that a real president had been chosen in a real enthusiastic process. My rheumy old eyes, just for a moment, glistened with idealism. And I knew that there has to be a certain amount of piety on these occasions. And I knew that this religious entrepreneur from Orange County, Rick Warren, was going to have to be asked to do the invocation, as they say. And then there was this old ham from the veteran days of the civil rights movement, the Reverend Lowry. And I think there was even a gay Anglican bishop on hand somewhere, though I lost track of where he actually fitted into the ceremony. So there was a sort of crazy salad of religiosity. And I understand that this is a pluralist country, and that there has to be that kind of thing. And I watched the swearing in, which It doesn't need in the Constitution to contain the words, "So help me God." They're not there. The Constitution doesn't require you to say it. Some presidents have, some have not. I saw Mr. Lincoln's Bible being proffered for the taking of the oath. There's no need to take your oath on a holy book. You don't have to do it. It's a matter of choice. But that it's Mr. Lincoln's Bible no more proves that Mr. Lincoln was a Christian than the recent use of Mr. Jefferson's Quran from the Library of Congress to swear in a Muslim congressman means that Mr. Jefferson was a Muslim. All this is theatre. What one wants, and what I always urge all people who care enough to pay attention to me, is to look to the language. Always look to the language. And so I was standing at a wonderful seat on the roof of the Canadian Embassy. I could practically have spat down onto the Chief Justice. I know. It crossed my mind as well. And I watched the peroration of the speech, which some of you will remember. And it took me a while to notice what was interesting about the peroration. And it took me a while to notice because the peroration came just after a section quite early in there, much earlier in the speech, that attracted immediate attention from all commentators, where our new biracial president, I would rather say biracial than black if you don't mind, or African American, said that, I quote, "Our patchwork heritage is a strength, not a weakness." Okay, that's not that hard to say. So we are a nation of Christians and Muslims, Jews and Hindus, and non-believers. There's a special dash to lead to that. Now, no president has ever stressed that before. In other words, said that those of us, like myself, who are of no belief, are Americans too. George Bush did make that concession once in a press conference, I will admit. But it's never been said in that, so to say, inclusive manner by any president before, or not on such an important occasion as this one. So that I thought was maybe a curtain raiser. But the most interesting bit I thought was reserved for the closing staves, and here I'm sorry, you'll just have to let me look something up and actually quote it directly. I can't do this from memory. Very well, with some of you this may still be in your minds. The President said in closing, "So let us mark this day with remembrance of who we are and how far we have traveled. In the year of America's birth, in the coldest of months, a small band of patriots huddled by dying campfires on the shores of an icy river. The capital was abandoned. The enemy was advancing. The snow was stained with blood. At a moment when the outcome of our revolution was most in doubt, the father of our nation ordered these words be read to the people." And I quote again, "Let it be told to the future world that in the depth of winter, when nothing but hope and virtue can survive, that the city and the country, alarmed at one common danger, came forth to meet it." Now, just for an experiment, does anyone know who wrote those words? Yeah. I should have said hands up rather than voices. Hands up, anyone who thinks they know who wrote those words. All right, that's very bad. But imagine how I should feel. I am the biographer of Thomas Paine and of his book, The Rights of Man. I'm supposed to know this stuff. And I was standing there in real time. And the penny didn't quite drop. Perhaps because of the prevailing euphoria and the mass emotion of the thing. But I wasn't able to parse it properly. I know perfectly well there was only one occasion when George Washington ever ordered anything to be read aloud. And actually, this may have been why I missed it. It wasn't to the people, as Obama said. It was to the troops. It was to the soldiers at Valley Forge to put some morale into them. That might have thrown me. And the words read were, gentlemen in the front guessed it right, a famous pamphlet called The Crisis, written by Thomas Paine, who had been, with common sense, the very first advocate of American independence. And I'm sure they still teach you this much in school. It begins, "These are the times that try men's souls." You have that, don't you, in your cortex? Tell me you do. You do. Please tell me that you do. These are the times that try men's souls. The summer soldier and the sunshine patriot will in this hour desert the standard, but he that stands it now, He that stands it now will deserve the love and the thanks of men and women. Tyranny, like hell, is not easily conquered, but we have this consolation that the harder the struggle, the greater the victory. That's the imperishable stuff. Written by also the person who wrote The Age of Reason. Well, and it goes back to the very beginning of the speech, which now I pass it again, because close reading is my business. The fourth paragraph begins, the main paragraph actually, says that we are now in the midst of crisis is now well understood. Our nation is at war. Now, you'll see where I'm going with this, I hope. But first, I have to take you through a rather awkward detour. I apologize for it, but there's nothing to be done. The prayer breakfast in Washington, D.C., that was held a couple of days later. If there are any two words in American culture that mean less to me than others, they would be prayer and breakfast. It took place at a hotel right next to where I live. I wouldn't have gone even if I could be bothered to get up, and even if I ate eggs in the morning. But here's what the president said at the National Prayer Breakfast, just after his inauguration. He said, "There is no doubt that the very nature of faith means that some of our beliefs will never be the same. We read from different texts. We follow different edicts. We subscribe to different accounts of how we came to be here and where we're going next, and some subscribe to no faith at all. We know, too, that whatever our differences, there is one law that binds all great religions together. Jesus told us to love thy neighbor as thyself. The Torah commands that which is hateful to you, do not do to your fellow. In Islam, there is a hadith that reads, none of you truly believes until he wishes for his brother what he wishes for himself. And the same is true for Buddhists and Hindus, for followers of Confucius, and for humanists." That's twice in 2 paragraphs, he stresses the existence of the large and growing constituency of the non-believer. It is, of course, the golden rule, the call to love one another, to understand one another, to treat with dignity and respect those with whom we share a brief moment on this earth. So there's going to be a White House Office of Faith-Based and Neighborhood Partnerships still. That's not going to be scrapped, but, says the president, the goal of this office will not be to favor one religious group over another, or even religious groups over secular groups. It will simply to work on behalf of those organizations that want to work, on behalf of our communities, and to do so without blurring the line that our founders so wisely drew between church and state. Again, unprecedented comment, and because made at a prayer breakfast, not noticed by my incredibly lazy profession, which continues to make the assumption that everybody in America is constantly hurling themselves around at a revival meeting. In Mr. Obama's book, which I hope some of you have read, about his religious upbringing, he says very plainly and very attractively, it seems to me, whether you agree with it or not, I just like the engaging way in which it's phrased. I was not raised in a particularly religious household. I had a father who was born a Muslim but became an atheist, grandparents who were non-practicing Methodists and Baptists, and a mother who was skeptical of organized religion, even as she was the kindest, most spiritual person I have ever known. So this, I think, is a period that's going to challenge the assumption of the religious parties, the religious factions in the United States, that it is they who have the default position, that it is they who have the right to speak, that in moments of crisis when counseling is required, that it is men of God who are called to the studio and asked for their healing remarks. And if any of you can tell me if anything they remember said by a priest, a rabbi, or an imam of that kind after 9/11, for example, when they were all called to the studio, you can put up your hand too and say what it was. But I don't think anyone can remember any such thing being said. Nonetheless, the assumption was that's where you go. And it's possible that the words humanist and secular may come to be, or philosophical, may come to be as accepted, perhaps in our time, if we can witness for it, as the idea of the clerisy. And if not, well, you'll have to consider some alternatives. So, to summarize what I've been trying to say about my little reading of the inaugural, what is it telling us, and how and why, that in invoking Thomas Paine, our unacknowledged founding father, the man who is the moral author of the Declaration of Independence, why is Obama not willing to cite Paine by name? Why is that? He quotes him, the obsessive verba, they're all Paine's words, but he won't say Paine. He tries to make it sound as if Washington caused it to be said, because that's respectable. So before I loop back to try and answer that question, I should offer you a brief tour of the places where this principle of church-state separation isn't codified or respected at all. Just a quick look along the horizon to give you an idea of what we are up against. To begin with the one that's least noticed, I think, and maybe the most menacing, the evolution of modern Russia into a theocracy, a police-state theocracy. Some of you may remember that President Bush, when he first met Vladimir Putin, said, I think in a strong field, this is the stupidest thing Bush ever said. That he looked into his eyes and seen into his soul and realized he was a man to be trusted. And that the outward evidence of this inward and visible grace was a crucifix that had belonged to Putin's mother around the guy's neck. And I thought, wow, that was easy. For Putin, I mean. But actually, I was a little bit too cynical. I actually asked a researcher to check. I said, has Putin ever worn that crucifix before or since? Or did he think the president could be pushed over as easily as that? And he hadn't actually worn it before, but he's very much taken to wearing it since. The Russian Orthodox Church, which is only one of the many Christian churches in Russia, and only one of the many religious institutions in Russia, now has a state monopoly on power. It swears in the newly elected leader, Mr. Medvedev. He can't be sworn in without kissing an icon and kissing the hand of the patriarch. Other religions are increasingly not allowed to be taught in schools, not allowed to try and convert people or spread their own teachings. These are mainly Protestant, but also Roman Catholic churches, schismatic, non-Orthodox Catholic churches. Jewish organizations are falling under the same ban as they used to when Russian Orthodoxy was the official ideology of Russia the last time, under Tsarism, when it was the official excuse maker for serfdom, slavery, for anti-Semitism. It's from the Russian Orthodox extreme right wing that the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, the notorious anti-Semitic fabrication that was taken up by the Nazis, was originally put together. So all this is happening in a large, resentful, unstable country with nuclear weapons. It's beginning to say, we have at least God on our side. It's extremely menacing, and it's happening without protest, and again, in the media, very largely without much comment. Look a little further south to Persia, Iran as it's sometimes called, and you'll see a very menacing thing indeed, which is a theocratic regime that is within measurable distance of acquiring thermonuclear weapons, so that the nightmare that many of us have had for a very long time, when will it happen? Well, when will the intersection take place? A messianic theocratic regime or movement or group will get possession of apocalyptic weaponry. Well, I can tell you we now know the answer to that. It'll be sometime this year. At least the capacity to do so will be achieved. And a regime that runs on the official name for its ideology is the Velayat Faqih, the idea that everybody in the country is a child who is a ward of the mullahs, a child who's in the care of the theocracy. In other words, the citizen is the property of the clergy, and that believes that the hidden imam, the 12th imam, the missing imam, the one of the 12 who has not yet been brought back, will come back in this lifetime and save the world. Interesting about Shia theology, by the way. 12 figures, one of them gone missing, one of them expected back quite soon. I don't know where they get these ideas. But anyway, the Shia redemption is on its way, as is the idea that we all, in the meantime, are property of the clergy, as if we were their sheep. And now they have nukes. Take what comfort you can from that. I personally don't think, I've been to their country, I've been to its neighbors, I personally don't think they want to embark on an immediate war with Israel. That would be literally, quite literally, the last thing they would do, or with the United States. But I am certain that they intend to use the bomb for nuclear blackmail against their neighbors, in particular the Sunni oil-producing states of the Gulf, to impose their will on countries like Bahrain in the same way as Saddam Hussein would have done with Kuwait if he'd had a nuclear a weapon to back up his claims. Do I need to tell you how in Israel and in Palestine the parties of God are the ones preventing not just a settlement, but even the possibility of a discussion of a settlement? Everyone has known for a very long time that there needs to be a two-state solution to the Israel-Palestine dispute. The alternatives are all impossible or undesirable, or both. The majority of Israeli Jews are in favor of a two-state solution. So are the majority of American Jews. It's the official position of the Palestine Liberation Organization. It's the official position of the United Nations, more or less, and of the European Union, and of the United States, and of the non-aligned movement. It's what everybody wants. The majority of both sides and everyone in the rest of the world wants. Why can't we get it? Because the parties of God have a veto on it. Because there's a fanatical messianic group of settlers in Israel who say, no, we have the right to take other people's land, to steal it, in order to bring on the Messiah. That's a God-given right. It's in the Bible. No politician can alter it. That's our right. And we can block any attempt to get rid of us. And we will bring it on. And on the other side, increasingly, an Islamist leadership among the Palestinians that says, that's exactly right what you just said. You're completely right. God has given this land to one people only. It's just not to you. It's to us. It's exclusively Muslim vilayat. It belongs to us. Christians and Jews and heretics have no, and let alone unbelievers, have no place here. You've just got, it was the right message, but the wrong message. This debate is also about to become nuclear by proxy and by existing tension. And there's a real possibility that those who hope to use this dispute to bring about Armageddon and the end of the world will get their way. That's what happens if you don't separate the church and the state, to put it crudely. In Pakistan, originally created as a state for Muslims, there's now a Muslim state. Remember, the two things, as with a state for Jews, or homeland for Jews, and a Jewish state, are completely different. In one, there's a haven for the members of a minority. In the other, the religious laws of that minority apply to everyone who lives within its borders, and can be made to extend even further. So that Sharia law is now being imposed on Pakistan at quite a rapid rate. No longer a state for Muslims, but a Muslim state. And another failed state, becoming a rogue state, intervening in the internal affairs of a neighboring Muslim state, which it hopes to recolonize Afghanistan, using methods of terror and with nuclear weapons in its own background. And probably about 2 months away, no more, if we're realistic, from defaulting on all its debts and becoming a basket case with no foreign exchange and no foreign reserves. And nothing of prestige about it, except that it has squandered its resources on becoming a nuclear power. And confronting India, hopelessly outgunned in every other way, where nuclear weapons provide, in its own mind, its own possibility of survival. I don't need to tell you what it's like in Iraq, or has been like, when the parties of God tried to impose themselves, not just on the rest of society, but on each other, killing people, not just because they weren't Muslim, but because they were the wrong kind of Muslim. The worst kind of war, the worst of all, and I'm coming back to this point in a moment, is between believers, not between believers and unbelievers. And between believers in the same faith, at that. If you want to see what real fratricide looks like, see Muslims fight each other in Iraq, as I have done, about which is the kosher interpretation of the Quran. We can snigger at this kind of thing and think how primitive it is, but in my country of birth, the United Kingdom, for many, many years, nearly 30, people would kill each other in one quarter of Northern Ireland over what kind of Christian they should be. And this wasn't unrelated to the fact that in my country, the head of the church is the head of the state. In other words, when Queen Elizabeth dies, a bat-eared, balding, resentful young man with no taste in women and a weird attitude towards wanting to be the Caliph of Islam as well as the head of other, will become, at the moment Her Majesty's heart stops beating, simultaneously the head of the state, the head of the armed forces, and the head of the church. Can any more absurd picture be drawn? That's what you get if you try and found a national church on the family values of Henry VIII, which is what they did. If I still lived, I'm an American citizen now, but if I wasn't, I would be compelled to pay taxes for this kind of thing. And to listen to the Archbishop of Canterbury, a man who does a perfect impersonation of a bleating sheep. He's supposed to be a shepherd, for heaven's sake. Say, because he thinks that any faith is better than none, and his churches are empty and deserted, that the Muslim community, the only community in Britain that still goes regularly to prayer, should be allowed Sharia law, so that women and children and young adults in Muslim communities in Britain would not be governed by the same law that governs all of us. The one guarantee of the rule of law and of enlightenment that unites all citizens. No, they could go to a Sharia court and might have to, and there have Quranic law imposed on them in the United Kingdom by permission of a state patriarch of a government-funded church. Be thankful. Mark Twain used to say about the United States, the great thing about being American is that we have all the freedoms it's possible to imagine and all the wisdom it takes not to employ any of them. Don't let that be said of you. Look, you know I could go on. I could go on. I've just come back from Western Europe. The Christian Democrats, the civilian politicians of the Christian side in Germany and France and Italy are very worried, very upset because the Pope has just made an outreach gesture to a group of neo-fascist cranks and crackpots who believe that genocide against the Jews didn't take place, but Jewish deicide against Jesus of Nazareth did take place, and implicates all Jews as involved in blood guilt from more than 2,000 years ago. This kind of medieval reactionary nastiness and fantasy is right back in the mainstream, promoted from the heart of Rome itself. It's a tough outlook whichever way you slice it. And I hope when we move in a moment to having a joint discussion that you'll ask me for some more instances or comments on it. Now, in the United States, which is why I'm so happy about what Mark Twain said, all this was decided very, very early on in the Virginia of Mr. Jefferson and Mr. Madison. Under the British Empire, in Virginia, there was only really one church. It was the Anglican Church, the Church of England. There were some other smaller dissenting Christian churches, but there was only one real church. It represented the crown. Everyone had to pay taxes to keep it going. Those who were its priests and preachers were government employees, and that was that. That clearly couldn't continue after the expulsion of the British monarchy from Virginia. So there were three alternatives, and they were all hotly debated. Patrick Henry, very famous Virginian patriot, said it wouldn't be fair to continue paying our tithes to the Anglican Church, the English Church. We should instead pay tithes to support all churches. Thomas Jefferson and James Madison said, no, that would be ridiculous. No one should have to pay to support any church whose views he doesn't approve of. Or, if you like, made to pay for a church whose views he does approve of. There is an alternative between supporting one and supporting all. And it's quite simple. The government supports none, takes no position. This commonsensical view took a long, long, long time to establish itself. But these were great generals in parliamentary terms and congressional terms and in the State House terms. They fought it through, and they got it adopted as the Virginia Statute on Religious Freedom, the first time I know of anywhere in the world where it was announced that the state and the church could have no relationship. And no one's money could go to the upkeep of a religion in which he or she did not believe. Up till then, if you were in Maryland, for example, you couldn't hold office if you weren't a Catholic. In New York, I think New York, well, certainly Massachusetts, you couldn't hold office if you were one. In Georgia, you had to say your official religion was Protestant, whatever that might mean. It could mean, it had to be Protestant. You could be a Jew in Rhode Island, I think, and hold office, but not in Delaware. It was like that. It was multiple choice, all of them bad, all of them sectarian, and all of them incompatible and mutually exclusive. There would have been a civil war much sooner than there was on religious grounds. But at the Constitutional Convention and afterwards, in subsequent discussions, the Virginia Statute on Religious Freedom became the pattern and the mold for what we now call the First Amendment to the United States Constitution. Again, a unique statement that Congress can make no law respecting the establishment of religion or abridging the free practice of same. So simple, and yet it took such a long time to get done. And freedom of religion, therefore, has to mean freedom from it. it's clearly understood, it seems to me, clearly understood by Washington's letter, George Washington's letter to the Synagogue of Rhode Island, saying that the state gives no sanction to bigotry, and everyone must feel safe under their own roof tree, and there shall be none to make them afraid. It's even more clearly understood by famous letter to the Baptists of Danbury, Connecticut, by Thomas Jefferson, to celebrate. They wrote to him to congratulate him on his victory in 1801 and said that they felt that they didn't have in Connecticut the right to be Baptists. They were only tolerated. A very important distinction, that they were not really Baptists, allowed to be Baptists as of right, but they were treated as if they were a rather off-color minority. Now, who were the Baptists in, this is a very important point, who were the Baptists in Connecticut afraid of? Why were they so worried for their rights and their liberties and their safety that they wrote to the President of the United States? Who did they think was coming after them? Who did they think was discriminating against them, giving them a bad time? The Congregationalists of Connecticut is what they were afraid of. Now, to most people who aren't involved in Calvinism and Protestantism, the distinction between being a Baptist and a Congregationalist these days is practically invisible. I can assure you it's not invisible to them. It's quite a big deal. In those days, it was a really big deal. You could be killed in Massachusetts not very long before that for being the wrong kind of Christian, or a Quaker. That's what they were worried about. And that's what the religious myths, the people who want to tear down our wall of separation, who want to abridge it or take a few bricks out of it, don't understand that the guarantee of one freedom is the guarantee of everybody's. Thomas Jefferson, when he wrote his reply about the wall of separation, cared so much that he had his Attorney General, Lincoln Levi, review it. It wasn't just a casual reply. He said, we could be building a precedent in the letter I write back to these people. It's thought by many that Jefferson beat Adams precisely for this reason. There was a lot of propaganda against Jefferson. By the way, I try to make you laugh. I also hope to make you cry every now and then. When the electors in the United States, when it was Adams versus Jefferson, had a choice between two candidates. One of them was the founder of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences, and the other was the president of the American Academy of Arts and Letters. I don't know. The candidate pool seems to have shriveled a bit since then, but and at least in 1796 they could choose both because the runner-up would become the vice president. So eat your heart out. Jefferson was attacked throughout as an atheist, which he, in my opinion, quite probably was. He was attacked as being impious, for having an affair with a slave girl, which he most certainly was doing. But in general, he was attacked for being not respecting enough of religion, whereas Adams was the upright Episcopalian, standard, fellow, dutiful, pious, and so forth. Many, many, many were the conversations overheard by journalists and reporters at that time, and pamphleteers, of people in the coffee houses and taverns of America, religious people saying, I, as a Methodist, shall vote for Thomas Jefferson, even if he be a deist, or worse, an atheist, because I don't want an Episcopalian dictatorship. I would rather have. You can see how it would go. The Congregationalists thought the same. The Quakers undoubtedly voted for Jefferson, I think. Anything would be better than the other person's sectarianism. Ask the next person who says to you they think there should be prayer in schools. Or don't ask them, tell them. Tell them you win. Prayer in schools starts tomorrow. Everyone will be making the profession of faith in the Quran. And going and bowing right. What are you talking about? Isn't that what you wanted? No. I wanted it only to be my prayer. Well, you should have said that sooner. You can see how it would go. Oh, right. You want equal time for creationist and intelligent design stories to be told. Equal time for that and for Darwinism and the study of evolution and natural selection. Very well. The Hindu myth of the creation of the world, much older and much more beautiful, by the way, much more literary, will now be taught in all schools. Are you happy now? No, they won't be happy. I can promise you that. But this is the kind of nonsense we're expected to entertain in the name of faith and in the name of respect for it. Well, children, after the break, now you've had astronomy, we'll be meeting again for the astrology class. Equal time. Chemistry, well, your alchemy teacher is off sick today. yet again having blown himself up. You can see how it would go. This is not equal time. This is the attempt to stultify the children of a secular republic with the teaching of superstition and nonsense, and it's trying to smuggle it in through customs under a surreptitious and false description and name. And all of this has to stop. And our slogan, my slogan, I invite you to make it yours, is, Mr. Jefferson, build up that wall. Thank you. How long was that?
40 minutes. That sounds good. I'm sure I speak for everyone when I say one of the pleasures of listening to Christopher Hitchens is his eloquence is both provocative and entertaining simultaneously. So we now have about 40 minutes for questions and answers. We have two microphones, stationary microphones, stationed on either side of the hall. We'd ask people to line up behind those to ask their questions. In the interest of getting as many questions in as possible, I would ask you to keep your remarks and questions very short and to the point. I also want to remind people that at the end of the Q&A session, we will have a table out front, and Mr. Hitchens has agreed to sign books, which will also be available to purchase his newest book, God is Not Great. I'm going to take the prerogative of the host and ask the first question. You've written and spoken very eloquently of many of the pathologies of the way religion is practiced in societies around the world. I have a slightly more philosophical question, and that is, you are well aware, there's a group of communitarian philosophers, people like Alasdair MacIntyre and others, who have argued that the Enlightenment effort to ground a conception of morality and social justice, in particular, in reason alone has failed. And the only alternative now to moral relativism is returning back to religion or some kind of transcendental value system. And so I'd wonder how you would respond to those types of critics.
I have a great respect for Professor MacIntyre in particular, and I think that there can be an objection to reason, pure reason as it's sometimes called, which is that it's a trifle arid. Just as my own self-definition as an atheist. By the way, I just wanted to say something before I forget. Everything I had said to you just now could have been said, I urge you to remember, by someone who was a person of faith. Nothing that I said to you about the need for separation depends on my unbelief. I think it's as important for people who are churchgoers to understand that the relationship with the state and the church is what poisons mutually. Just had meant to underline that, sorry. Just as prelude also to saying or repeating, when I say I'm an atheist, I don't say much for myself. I mean, I could be an atheist and a nihilist. I could be an atheist and a fascist. Unlikely, because most fascists are, or have traditionally been Roman Catholics. I could be an atheist and a Stalinist. I could be an atheist and a Stalinist, almost mandatory, in fact. I could be an atheist and a sadist. It tells you nothing about me, or it shouldn't. I don't have a special word for saying I don't believe in Santa Claus, or the Tooth Fairy, or Vishnu, or Tutti Quanti. I don't. So it is a negation, you're right. And there are those who fear that an atheist culture would be a bleak one. And I see what they mean. I think a great cultural question is this: how do we retain what's valuable of human history, of coexistence with and generation of religion, without giving in to the superstitious or the supernatural? It has to be conceded, secularism hasn't built very many cathedrals, hasn't composed very many oratorios, hasn't done very much in the way of painting. I'm actually not a great fan of devotional painting. I know a bit about architecture. I know a bit about music, and I know quite a lot about poetry, and I certainly think that the work, whereas someone might have worked on a Gothic cathedral while not believing in God, because there would have been no alternative work for a stonemason at that point, or an architect either. He'd have had to pretend to believe. that the sonnets of John Donne or the poems of George Herbert would have been very, very hard to write if they were being written by a hypocrite. That's how it seems to me. Though Giuseppe Verdi could write a requiem while not being a believer. So we can't be sure, and nor should we want to be sure. There's no need for certainty or over-quantification in this. The point is, we know this much. Human beings cannot live without some concept of the numinous or the transcendent, without, in other words, indefinable terms such as love or the infinite. That's fine. I wrote a book about the Parthenon, for example. It's impossible for me, I hope you, to imagine Europe or civilization without the Parthenon, without the symmetry and proportion and grace and accessibility that it brought to art and to architecture. If it were to be demolished, I would feel as if I'd had suffered some terrible amputation. But I care nothing for the cult of Pallas Athena, and I don't have to, or the Eleusinian mysteries, or the Panathenaic procession. All these are gone for us and for me. They're a subject for scholarship only. It's a matter, therefore, I think, culturally and intellectually, it'll be a great task for us all to wrestle with, of bringing together the cultural, the transcendent, the numinous, while, as far as possible, separating ourselves from the cultish, from the superstitious, and from the supernatural. I hope that's the beginning of an answer, at any rate. I don't know if it's invidious if I point to questioners. How do you know I haven't planted members of my immediate family in there? But I see no alternative. Anyway, there's only one. So you, sir.
Thank you very much. First, it's a pleasure for my wife and I to be here listening to you. We're fans of yours.
Thank you.
In the readings that I have, in the books I've read of our founding fathers, I've been led to believe that actually more of them than just Tom Jefferson are non-believers and maybe even were atheists, not just Tom Jefferson. My question is this. I think I read in the New York Times that something like 17% of Americans, American adults, may be non-believers. And they may be the true silent majority. So would you recommend, or how would you recommend, that this very significant population of America basically come out of their closets and begin to exert themselves much more than they have been in the past in a variety of venues, whether it's political, social, the arts, etc. So what would you say about that?
Well, I think it's already happening. That's why I began as I did. I think the president has come to understand it. And that may be very significant. I think that the success of books by great educators like Richard Dawkins and Daniel Dennett, Sam Harris, the huge sales and the enormous crowds that are drawn to debates with the religious on these points, testimony to it. The religious know, I know this for sure, the religious people know that their time of monopoly, of taking it easy, of assuming that they're in charge is over. They have to fight for it now. So there's a big cultural moment going on. I'm sorry to use the word cultural so often, but there isn't really an alternative for, if you like, the re-secularization or the reconfirmation of the secularization of the United States. Because I think people look at the examples I gave and some others around the world and in America, and they just say they're fed up with theocratic bullying and intimidation and murder and ignorance. And they want to find ways of showing that they would like to push back against it. And I think everyone should try and do that. I've got an example, if you like. If this ever happens in any community near you, people say, well, we want the schools to teach only for equal time, you understand, but we want our views on creation and intelligent design, as it's now called, taught alongside. Well, suppose sometimes the school board adopts that for a brief while. They did in Texas, they did in Pennsylvania, they did in Oklahoma, they did elsewhere. It's usually overturned. But while it happens, just say, all right, we take you up on it. That means every church that has a tax break, which is all of them, and in particular any church that takes a handout of any kind from the faith-based initiative of the White House, must give half its time to the teaching of Darwin and to the sale in its lobby of books about evolution. That means what could be, you said you wanted equal time. Do you mean it? Now, they're not ready for this at all, I can tell you. So it would be just as good to do that as it would to fight them in court and say they can't have it. In fact, in a funny way, the president was right in saying, let's teach the debate. By all means, let's teach it. What would we have to fear? I know everything I know, practically, about Darwinism from studying two great confrontations. One in England, where Darwin's deputy, Thomas Huxley, had a debate with Bishop Wilberforce at Oxford in the Natural History Museum, completely crushing defeat for the Church of England. Where Bishop Wilberforce actually did ask Huxley, did he think he was descended from apes on his grandmother's or his grandfather's side? He did. Bishop Huxley was later killed, by the way, I digress, but by falling, he was thrown from his horse and landed on his head, and Huxley said, finally the brains of the bishop had encountered reality. Anyway, a remark Darwin would have been too humane to make. And the second was by studying the Scopes trial in Dayton, Tennessee, the famous film you've probably seen, Inherit the Wind, also played Clarence Darrow and H.L. Mencken versus William Jennings Bryan on the question of whether Darwinism could be taught in an American school. So all of what we know and value in this business comes from the confrontation. By all means, let's not say it shouldn't take place. Your anterior point, sir, was, oh, how many founding fathers were non-believers? Well, when George Washington felt he had to go to church as president, would leave before the sacrament was offered, before the actual mass, the real thing was offered. He would leave the church, get on his horse and go home. The minister said to him, wasn't it hypocritical of him to come to church and not do that? And Washington thought about it for a week and said, yes, it is. So I'm going to stop coming altogether. But he felt as president he ought to do that kind of thing, as many presidents have. If you were living in that period and you were an educated person, it would be very hard not to be a deist, really very hard, because there was obviously an order and a symmetry to the universe of some sort. And the study of science made that more attractive in some ways than less. And quite clearly also was less and less truth to the teachings of official religion. So the default position of someone born before Darwin and Einstein would have almost had to be a deist one, as it was with Thomas Paine, for example. He was always denounced for being an atheist, but he wasn't. He wrote The Age of Reason to defend God and the dignity and splendor and magnificence of God from the ridiculous man-made fables spun in the Bible and the Quran and the Torah. That's what it is to be a deist. Sorry for a long answer, but you will ask these incredibly beautiful questions.
Yeah, in the Baha'i faith, there's the concept that every religion has its season. The hope of spring, the fruit of summer, the corruption of winter. You seem to be one who puts a lot of comfort and safety in secular ideals. I'm just wondering if these secular ideals somehow transcend the erosion of history.
Well, I've met some Baha'i people, and I have a sense of what they feel. What they say, in a way, is that all religions are imperfect glimpses of the same unknowable. It's hard to disagree with. But they make a terrible mistake with the Muslims, because they say there could be a revelation after the Quran, which means they're horribly persecuted in all Islamic countries. I prefer to say I think all religions are equally untrue. Glimpses of the same fantasy, in other words. Well, it's the same as the point I was making about separation. Either all the religions are true, seems to be impossible by definition, or only one of them is true, something that many people do want to argue. The Muslims do. The Roman Church increasingly does. It's not just the faith, it's the one true faith. But then that means that all other people who believe in God are wasting their time. They can't go to heaven. Rick Warren said directly, I have him on tape saying it in Aspen, Colorado, to a questioner from the audience who's Jewish, can I get to paradise if I'm a Jew? No, ma'am. No, ma'am. You can't. What does he think he knows about it? You should pardon the expression. But that's what you'd have to be a religious thug and dolt and businessman like that to say, no, only by me can you go to paradise. Imagine that. Or you can take what I consider a very lucid view. None of them are true. then everything all falls into place. Does anyone here read the novels of Peter de Vries? You should. He's a very great novelist, minor key novelist, raised in the Dutch Reformed Church in Michigan, where if you're not Dutch, you're not much. So he wrote, he's one of those people, he's a great New Yorker writer, and he could write tragedy and comedy. There's a tragic novel called The Blood of the Lamb. It's about the death of a child. And there's a very funny novel called Mackerel Plaza, and another one called Slouching Towards Kalamazoo. And I think it's in the third one where one of the characters says, humans used to be polytheistic and believe there were gods everywhere, and in trees and in streams and in rocks and so on. And then they became less polytheistic and just said there were different kinds of gods in a pantheon. And then they became monotheistic and said there was only one God. And they're getting nearer to the true figure all the time. Thank you.
Unfortunately, our time is up now. I want to remind those of you who are interested that Mr. Hitchens' recent book is for sale outside. He'll be out there signing books. And now on behalf of the Foley Institute and on behalf of Global Studies, I want to thank all of you for coming out this evening.
Indeed.
And I hope you will join me now in thanking Christopher Hitchens for a very provocative and interesting evening.
Thanks a lot. Very nice.